Hello and welcome to the 2019 Student Government Presidential Debate.
We're coming to you live from the ATV studios in Mary Grayton Center. Thank you for tuning in to this year's debate. I'm Awais, Ahmad.
And I'm Alexis, Arnold. We will be your moderators this evening. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that although I'm editor-in-chief of the Black Print, I have maintained editorial distance from any endorsements by the publication. Now for the rules. This debate will be divided into 3 parts, separated by 2 commercial breaks.
At the start of the debate, each of the candidates will be given 60 seconds for an opening statement. For each question, candidates will have approximately 2 minutes for the answer. The candidates may ask us to repeat a question. Each candidate will also be given 45 seconds for rebuttal at the discretion of Alexis and I.
Our candidates tonight are Angela Chen and Joshua Dantzler. The first opening statement has been determined by a coin flip. Angela, we will begin with your opening statement. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys so much for hosting us. Hi, my name is Angela Chen, and I'm running to be your next student government president because student voices have been speaking up and AU has not been listening. The student body deserves a leader, a woman of action, who will go after the AU administration and stand up for students at all costs. My platform is LEAD, leveling the playing field for low-income students of color, elevating student voices, accountability of the office of the student government president, and dining reform. I look forward to hearing what debate has to be said tonight, and I look forward to hearing from my opponent, Josh.
Thank you, Angela. Joshua, you can begin your opening statement now.
Yes, thank you, Angela, and thank you, ATV, for having us here. My name is Joshua Dantzler. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And while I've enjoyed my AU experience, I haven't been able to confidently say this is my home or this is my family. After talking to lots of people and several students on this campus, they had the same issues as me or more. And so I decided to run, and I knew that it was time. It's time that we start having affordability, inclusivity, and community all throughout this campus. And it starts with the office of the president.
Thank you both for your statements. We will now begin with our first topic, finances and affordability. This first question is for both candidates.
Your platforms both discuss improving transparency from university departments such as financial aid. What are specific steps to implement this change? We will start with Angela.
Thank you for the question. So one of the first things that I started talking about when I announced that I was running is this idea of a tuition shopping sheet. So when I was at an undergraduate center, I helped introduce this bill that basically states that students that are coming into AU should know the exact cost of their education. I have too many of my peers have had to drop out or transfer because they can no longer afford to come to this university. Before you enroll in AU, you should know exactly how much each year of your education is going to cost and whether or not your financial aid is going to increase or decrease. Again, a second part of that is financial aid transparency, in the sense that when your financial aid package changes, you should know exactly why. The reason being your family circumstances changed is not enough for me, and I don't think it's enough for many students. When your financial aid increases or it decreases, you should know the exact cause and be able to appeal that. Working as a case advocate, I've been able to help students go through financial aid appeals, and I know what it's like, and I've been able to empathize with students that have lost their financial aid packages. I think the financial aid office and the university in general must be more transparent with how students are being charged for the cost of their tuition and whether or not they're going to be able to maintain their financial aid throughout the years.
Thank you. Joshua, you can provide your response.
Yes, and so when we talk about affordability, we have to start talking about accessibility, as the two go hand in hand. And one of those ways that financial aid can be more affordable and accessible is by having office hours and extending the office hours, specifically the 9 to 5. Simply, it does not cut it anymore. And so we need to make sure that financial aid is meeting students where they are and where there needs to be. For many students like myself, we go to classes that end at 5:20, or we go to classes that go to 10 o'clock sometimes. And so we have to start having these office hours where we're saying, hey, these 9 to 5s don't cut it anymore. Let's go maybe to 10 to 6 or from 10 to 7 and meeting students where they need to be once a semester, twice a semester, even 3 times a semester, so that students are having the option, the opportunity to meet with their counselors to get what they need to know and to really plan that financial aid out. I think specifically with those extensions of the office hours, things will be more transparent and having communication often and always occurring are those steps that we can take.
We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, your time begins now.
Thank you. I do hold the opinion that we should hold our financial aid counselors and the financial aid system at AU to a higher standard in general. I think that a lot of students have come to me frustrated that their financial aid counselor has not been able to actually help them be able to address their financial aid package and determine whether or why their financial aid package is changing or why they're losing their scholarship. I think while I do agree that the financial aid office should be open longer, I think also the root of the problem is that financial aid counselors aren't always helping the students that they should be. So we should be allowing for more transparency within the financial aid system itself.
Thank you. Joshua, your rebuttal?
Yes, and so while we need more transparency and while we need them to be more accessible and to let us know, we need to also consider the other factors that go into this AU experience. It's not just tuition that students are paying for. Students are paying for money that goes to being tested at the health center. When they want to be STD tested. They are paying for the laundry prices. They're being paid for several other expenses such as books each semester. And so I think when we start talking about financial aid again, we need to start thinking comprehensively and thinking about how the other factors, not just tuition, that goes into the expenses here at AU, and as a student who's a low-income student, I've heard those complaints, and I know that we have to prioritize comprehensively what affordability looks like, what it means on a day-to-day basis in navigating this institution.
Thank you. We'll now move on to question 2. Earlier this year, there was a failed referendum to increase the student activity fee. More recently, the Eagle released an article that reported that the cost for the Founders Day Ball has increased significantly in the past few years. How do you plan to responsibly allocate and spend student activity funds? Joshua, you will lead us off. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, so with the failed referendum, it clearly showed us that there was distrust in student government. Not only was there distrust, but there was an interest in continuing that cost. And so if elected, I think we have to prioritize student voice. Student voice now, student voice always, student voice forever. And making sure that we are working with the Founders Day team, the programmers, the vice president, and saying, hey, what do students want? I think definitely making sure that we are always including student voice in conversation as how things actually happen and achieve, and how things can actually go out to be a success. And so I think we have to definitely work with the vice president and making sure that student voice is in the conversation, and I would love to do so in response to Founders Day. I think we still can have tradition, I think we still can have a great time, but we have to look at what the students want. And if students want less for more, you can do more with less. And I would love to entertain that conversation.
Thank you. Angela, you can provide your response.
I think there is a strong distrust in student government, and for that reason, I actually think what we should be prioritizing is student voices and student leaders on campus. One of the things that I think is very important is allocating more money specifically to the Student Leadership Grant Fund so that more student leaders on campus are able to be compensated for the hard work that they're doing to create communities for many groups of students at AU. I think that a lot of the reason why students don't necessarily trust American University student government is a general lack of accountability. There's no real way for students to directly hold the office of the president accountable, and part of my platform is that I would like to introduce an amendment to the Constitution to allow students to directly vote for whether or not the president can or should or should not resign, because as of right now, only the undergraduate Senate can do that. So I think there's a lack of accountability, and I also think there's a lack of elevation of student voices that are much different than they were 50 years ago. So I do think there should be a move away from tradition.
Thank you. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Joshua, you may begin your time.
I think there's nothing wrong with tradition. Tradition is actually really nice, and tradition brings community to campus. I think there's a lack of community on campus and a lack of school spirit. But I think we need to really think strategically about what that tradition looks like. So let's not say let's get rid of tradition, but rather let's alternate tradition and modify tradition. I think tradition can always be changed. In terms of making sure that we are accountable, I think we have to think about accessibleness before accountableness again. I think too far and too often we say, hey, let's hold SG accountable. But how are we holding SG accountable if we're not on one accord? And so I think, in my first 100 days, I want to make sure that we are setting a tone as directors, as leaders, as executives, and saying, hey, what is the mission and the vision of this organization so that we can be held accountable? So I think we have to think about what does that look like before we say, hey, let's hold SG accountable.
Thank you. Angela?
I think that when it comes to successfully allocating money, part of that is also demanding financial transparency from the university. Students should be able to know where their tuition dollars come from, and as the president, there should be advocacy regarding further transparency on where our tuition dollars are being spent. The Eagle recently released an article about the rising cost of tuition, and the second most cost that our tuition dollars are going to is just, quote, supplies. What does that mean? How is that enriching the student experience by spending the second most amount of our tuition dollars on supplies? I think that we need to demand more financial transparency from the university, because although $130,000 for founders is a lot, there's also a $1.2 billion budget being passed. Where is that money going to enrich the student experience?
Thank you. Here's our final question for affordability and finances. A recent article by The Eagle reported that tuition costs have rose steadily over the years and predicted it will continue to skyrocket in the future. In what ways will you advocate to provide students with appropriate financial support to offset rising attendance costs? Angela, you may answer.
So I strongly believe that we need to advocate for a decrease in a consistent decrease in tuition hikes. So recently it was said that the 3% increase, the 3% tuition hike was the lowest it's ever been, the lowest it's been in recent years. However, according to the College Board, an average private college institution only increases its tuition 2.3 or 2.4%. I think that AU is still above the curve on how much we're hiking up our tuition, and we need to demand that that number, 3%, either stays the same or decreases throughout the years. And I think eventually there should be conversation about some sort of tuition freeze or tuition fix for students, because I just don't think it's feasible, as the Eagle article clearly showed, to continue hiking up our tuition the way that we have been.
Thank you. Joshua, your response?
Yes, and so on my platform, I specifically say that I think we need to advocate, and I will advocate for lowering the tuition costs in the boardroom. I think, as Angela mentioned, this year is the first year that we've seen a decrease in the tuition. However, we have to keep continuously going. And so I want to make sure that we are prioritizing that, and while we are prioritizing that, again, prioritizing the various costs that come with navigating this AU experience. So making sure that while the tuition is being lowered, that we're also factoring in the additional costs that students have. And in the part of my platform, I specifically say that I'm calling and mandating professors to let us know what their textbooks look like, what the prices are. Students should not be questioning if they can afford a class, if they can afford the textbooks. And so I think we have to continuously think about, while tuition is lowering, that we're thinking about what is the other additional costs that come as being a student here at AU.
We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, you may begin.
I think that encouraging professors to put the price of their books on their syllabi doesn't necessarily get to the root of the problem. First and foremost, I'm also a low-income student, and I don't think low-income students should be discouraged from taking classes by looking at a syllabus and realizing that the $500 textbook is just not within our budget. I think that there needs to be an on-campus system for buying and selling used textbooks so that students don't have to go online, they don't have to pay for shipping. I think there's practical solutions that we can implement on campus to address this issue of textbooks. But furthermore, I think that I do strongly believe that tuition is one of the main causes why American university is not affordable for many. While there are a lot of other aspects, I think that we do need to address the root problem of the incredibly rapidly rising cost of tuition.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yes, and while the textbooks don't eliminate the root cause of the problem, tuition is an ongoing problem. Students should not feel as if they're blindsided or surprised when they have a class. And so as someone who's paid lots of money on textbooks, I think we have to be upfront and honest about those costs. And so while I do agree and say that it isn't going to solve everything, students should know that, hey, if I'm getting to this class, this is the price of it. And professors have that right to let us know what we're being cost and what the cost is. And so, like I said, while it's not the root cause, it is a start to the conversation of being accessible when it comes to navigating this AU experience.
Thank you. That concludes our first topic. We'll be right back after this short commercial break featuring ATV's very own original content.
Myself Mr. Eagle. Good day. Forgot it again.
Welcome back to ATV's Student Government Debate. We left off discussing AU's affordability, and now we are transitioning into diversity and inclusion.
Joshua, we'll start with you. While significant efforts have been made for a more diverse student body, the same cannot be said about diversity within the faculty and administration. How do you plan on advocating for a more fully diverse AU?
Yes, diversity and inclusion is something that I hold near and dear to my heart. As someone who's worked in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion for 2 years now, I'm passionate about it. I think that while efforts are being made on the student level, I think we have to approach the professor level and the faculty level. And that starts with those trainings, right? And so those trainings are happening with the provost. I was lucky to attend a session where I heard that over 90 professors have been trained this semester in inclusive excellence pedagogy. However, that training is not just enough. We have to have student voice in that training, specifically AUSG members. And so as student government president, I will work tirelessly and effortlessly to meet with the provost and look and review at the training and say, hey, is this training being inclusive? How are students of color being prioritized in these trainings? Are students of color feeling tokenized? Are students of color feeling like they're not valued? And so we have to make sure that our training is being reflective of student voice. That's particularly in student-teacher evaluations. And part of my platform, I specifically say that we need to start having our student-teacher evaluations sent to the deans of students and the deans of the different schools. And so we have to make sure that students their voices are being heard. Their voices are being heard in the fact of what the training looks like and being reflective of what the training should be centered around.
Thank you. Angela?
I think something that's really important is emphasizing to the school how much of an impact having faculty and staff of color makes on the student experience. I think for the most part, the school doesn't necessarily understand how much having a professor that looks like you and talks like you, is from a place similar like you, can change your entire learning experience. And part of that advocacy is just communicating to them how much having faculty of color and staff of color enrich the student experience. I think one example is the School of Public Affairs. I think they've actually done a really great job over the past year, a couple of years, of trying to diversify their staff. And part of it is just making it a priority in the university's metaphorical head, I think, is that this is something that's very important to students, and I want to be able to communicate that. This is something that students will directly want, make students more invested in AU for, and I think that's something that the university cares about. I think that a lot of the position of the president is just communicating to the administration and communicating to the board of trustees that the students have this opinion and this is why, but this is also why you should necessarily agree. And this is how it benefits where you're coming from and your position to agree and to side with the voices of the students. I think a lot of times it's hard to make that connection between adults who are kind of in charge of our student experience and our dissatisfaction with the student experience. But I think that the very, very important part is just emphasizing to them how much of a huge difference this makes in the learning experience in general.
Thank you. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Joshua, you may begin.
Yes, and faculty of color, hiring more faculty of color is something near and dear to my heart. It's actually listed on my platform. I think we have to start prioritizing having our voices in the classroom being reflective of the student body. And so I commend President Burwell on her Inclusive Excellence Plan of already having that percentage increase. That's something that I'm advocating for by the year 2020 and so on. And so making sure that we are having an increase specifically in professors of color, professors who do look like us, who might sound like us, and have those same lived experiences.
Thank you. Angela?
And so I think that part of the problem is that professors are also often not held accountable for one reason or another. This has been obviously a conversation that's been had for decades in many different forms. Professors who have tenure abusing their power, professors making offensive comments in the classroom, and I think that having worked on the racially biased incident report in the past, something that I would like to see is something established so that in the same way that when you report a fellow peer or student for committing something racially biased or a bias-related incident, you should be able to report the same thing about a professor and be able to get a statement back regarding what's going to be done by the university and ensure that that doesn't happen again.
Thank you. We will now move on to question 2. AU's international student population has increased by 39% over the last year. How do you plan to make sure AU feels like home to its international students? Angela, you will lead us off. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so this year as an Explore DC leader, I actually had an amazing opportunity to interact with so many different international students, especially my native language being Chinese. It was really amazing to kind of get to talk to them as their first steps in AU and being able to help make them feel more comfortable by talking to them and what's also their first language. So I think part of the problem is the alienization of international students on this campus. For example, why do we house them all in the Berkshire apartments off campus, where they're unable to be living on campus and intermingling with students in the same way that other first-year students are allowed that opportunity? I think another part of the problem is that international students are often criticized for wanting to hang out or have friend groups based off of just international students. And I think that's not necessarily really the root of the problem. Like, I'm sure that a lot of international students would like to be more intermingled into the student body at large, but I think that criticism is coming from a place of misunderstanding. And I think that in general, the AU student body should be more aware of international students, especially as their numbers increase. And I do think that there's a big issue, at least personally, with a lot of the international students having told me that they feel a lot of pressure. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but one of AU's new international student programs, your acceptance into AU is contingent on whether or not you can maintain a certain GPA, and especially with college writing being a course that many international students must take in their first 2 years at AU, it's really important that we decrease the ostracization of international students on the main campus here at American University.
Thank you. Joshua, you can provide your response.
Could you repeat the question, Alexis?
Yes, definitely. AU's international student population increased by 39% over the last year. How do you plan to make sure AU feels like home to its international students?
Yes, I think we have to meet students where they are. And so we talk a lot about meeting students, where they are when it comes to students on our campus who are originally AU Eagles, but definitely making sure that we're meeting students where they are when they come as international Eagles. And so being as the president of AUSG, you have to make sure that you're having opportunities where you're engaging with them. And so I would love to open dialogue and discussion where I'm going to them and saying, hey, let's talk, let's see how AUSG can actually cater your needs and how we can actually help and assist and work with. And so I definitely want to make sure that we're being accessible and keeping them into the conversation. And I think we definitely have a larger increase, a percentage of international students. I was fortunate to work with do some trainings through CDI actually, training them on diversity and inclusion work, and also through work as an MLK Dev service leader. And so I think we have to really realize that we are having more international Eagles and how we're making it accessible for them, and through SG working with them. I think we can't work for them or we can't work behind them. We have to work with them and making sure that we are helping them in addressing what they actually need.
Thank you, Joshua. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, you may begin.
I think that international students are a group that's so often separated from the main part of campus that it's important that we bring them into the conversation, especially considering the fact that international students are not eligible for financial aid. Almost all of them are paying the full cost of tuition here at AU. They should be receiving the most enriching experience possible. The most enriching experience possible does not include being forced to live in the Berkshire away from main campus, where the whole point of you coming for this international abroad experience is to have the experience of living abroad in America and have the experience of gaining this education here on American University's campus. I definitely agree with Josh in the sense that one of the main problems that we just need to bring them more into the conversation. AUSG needs to be reaching out to international students and specifically recruiting international students to join the student government circle.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yes, we have to make sure that we are reaching each and every student. As student government president, we are not just the student government president of the student body that goes and lives on campus, about those who also live off campus as well. And so making sure that we are keeping them consistently in the conversation, making sure that we also are being accessible in the language and outreach. So when we're outreaching to them, that we're making sure that our marketing is not just in English, but it is in their native tongue. We're also making sure that we are meeting them at their events, we're having them come to our events. So making sure that we are doing everything to be as accessible and inclusive as possible need be.
Thank you, Joshua. This will be our final question for diversity and inclusion. Each year, candidates and administrators promise to improve the accessibility of campus facilities. However, improvements have been few and far between, as there are still many buildings that are not physically accessible to all students. How do you plan on advocating for and improving AU's accessibility issues? Joshua, you may begin.
I'm so fortunate to have supported bills in the undergraduate student when I was in the Senate to support accessibility. I think we have to start making sure that our campus is as accessible as we claim to be, and that comes down to physical buildings. And so I think that we have to make sure that we are assessing and doing conversations where we're saying, hey, how accessible is this for all students, and making sure that the students are meeting their requirements that they can that they need when they have these disability services, specifically when it comes to routes. And so on my platform, I specifically say how we should have more expanding our routes, our shuttle routes, so that we can be accessible and making sure that students are meeting their needs where they need to go, and especially students who may have, wheelchairs or who might be on crutches or any other physical disability. And so making sure that we're having accessibleness when it comes not just to our buildings, but not just to our events, but also in our routes, in the routes that we take to even come to AU, to even come to class.
Thank you. Angela, please provide your response.
Yeah, I think that is actually one of the most tangible pieces of change that came out of our session of Senate, is building that route in between EQB and in between EQB and East Campus. I think that part of also being accessible to every student on campus is also ensuring that our programming events are accessible. I think something great that Women's Initiative has done is at the bottom of every one of their Facebook events, they've said, if you need accommodations, please email us here. I think that our programming, especially as American University student government, should always be accessible. And I also think that as president, I would love to work with ASAC more to ensure that students who are filing with ASAC to get accommodations are getting what they need. I've had a couple students come up to me and say that ASAC hasn't exactly met their needs, and that they feel like they needed more time, or that ASAC believed that their disability or their hindrance was not enough of a reason to give them extra time on a test or to give them extra time in a class. And I think that working with ASAC to ensure that all students are satisfied with their experience with ASAC, whether you broke a leg, whether you broke an arm, or you have ADHD, every single student should feel that ASAC is listening to their needs and that they get the time that they need in their classes.
Thank you, Angela. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Joshua, you may begin your time.
Yes, so I definitely think we need to have those conversations where not just with the ASAC, but having facility management come in the conversation and say, hey, are these rooms being actually accessible? And keeping those things in mind. I think we have to start prioritizing the disabled community and making sure that members of this community is making sure that they actually feel that they can navigate this experience, navigate the experience well, just like able-bodied students. And I think we have to make sure that we're being intentional about our locations and intentional about the impact that we do within the accessible community.
Thank you. Angela?
I also think that part of the conversation is just making this an utmost priority. I don't think that the needs of disabled students should come as an afterthought or come as something that you think about after you've planned the whole event and go, how do I make this most accessible? I think that something that I'd like to commend is that this past semester we had our DC College Democrats and semester conference, and then there were students there who were actively checking in every step of the event to make sure that every aspect of it was accessible. I think that when it comes to programming, especially to AUSG programming, we should begin with the thought of, is this accessible and will this be an accessible event in general, and end with the thought that this was accessible and we're proud of the work that we've done.
And that concludes our second topic. We'll be right back after our next break.
I'll probably say hi to my dog.
My dog. My dog. The dogs. I greet all 3 of my dogs at once.
At College Nation, we really like dogs. But seriously, we're a community of filmmakers who create shareable, short-form content about college, AU, and all things DC. So whether you love YouTube, cooking videos, funny interviews, or just want to learn more about creating online videos, you should totally check us out. Or just join if you love dogs. Did we mention we really love dogs?
I can't take this anymore. We're starting right about now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is ATV News.
Welcome back to ATV Student Government Debate. We left off discussing diversity and inclusion on AU's campus, and we are now transitioning into public relations.
Angela, we will start with you. Both of you have discussed improvements in AU's dining program in your platforms. In the year that you will have as president, what changes do you plan on implementing so that the dining program is satisfactory to the student body?
I think that first and foremost, we need to look at the number of dining options that are available on campus, point blank. I think that no food services provider, even after we hopefully choose a new food services provider that better aligns with our values, should be able to monopolize dining options in the way that Aramark has. We used to, for example, have McDonald's on campus, where the Pod currently is, and Pod is owned by Aramark. I think that when you look at other campuses, comparable campuses in the DC area, for example, GW Dining, they have many different types of private vendors on campus. They have things like Chipotle, things that are like Kava on campus that students can use their meal swipes for. I think that it's ridiculous that the only thing that students can use their meal swipes for are owned by Aramark. No company should be able to monopolize on the student experience the way that Aramark has. The second part of my platform is that as we now have the opportunity to get rid of Aramark in the coming months in May to June, as we're accepting open bids for new food services provider, it's entirely important that we prioritize choosing a food services provider that, 1, provides our students with quality dining options, 2, continues to be affordable for students. It should not be a higher price point than it currently is now, and 3, treats its workers with respect. My biggest problem with Aramark, after the fact that it's gotten several students on campus sick from their food, is that they treat their workers with absolutely little to zero respect. And I would like to see those workers continue to be signed on with our new food services provider, as they have the most experience with AU's campus and our students, and we've already established that connection. But most importantly, I think that students are paying far too much to get far too little from what we call a dining plan here at American University.
Thank you, Angela. Joshua, you can provide your response.
Yes, when to address dining, we have to address it twofold. And so I have a two-pronged approach. One, we have to get our meal swipes back. I think if we're paying this price for meal swipes, we need to have the option to have them roll over. The dining program has stopped the meal swipe rolling over, and it's actually unacceptable. If students are paying to have a meal plan, they should be able to have the option, the opportunity, how they can use it and how they want to use it. Secondly, I think we have to think about our off-campus providers. I think it's a shame that we have things like Eagle Bucks and Diamond Dollars where we can't even use them at certain locations. We go to Chipotle, they say no. We go to Kava, they say no. I think if we have these locations specifically on our website, we have to have them actually working and being able to be used. So when I think about dining, I think about two ways. One, reclaiming our meal swipes, and reclaiming them that they can roll over the semesters. And then secondly, making sure that we are holding our word and putting our money where our mouth is, saying, hey, these off-campus providers can give us a dining opportunity that our on-campus cannot.
Thank you. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, your time begins now.
I think when it comes to talking about leveling the playing field between low income and students who come here from a background of wealth, part of that is dining. Many students who have a family background of wealth are able to go off campus or consistently order food from online service providers to supplement their dining plan. I know a lot of students last year who didn't use any of their meal swipes because they simply could not bring themselves to go into TDR. The difference is that low income students are forced to eat the food that we have on this campus, and it should be good for what they pay. I think it's ridiculous that we allow the standard of dining to be some kids get food poisoning. That should already be a one and done, gone.
Thank you, Angela. Joshua?
Yes, I think we have to start thinking critically and more comprehensively about our dining program and whose voices are in the room. And so I would love to continue working with Anne-Marie Powell, who's Director of Dining Services, to make sure that when we select someone new that's not earmarked, when we select someone new coming in, that we are having a very diverse food option and that option that is reflective for students who have to use this meal plan and use the food that's on campus. We have to start thinking about how we have food here that is not just good, but also reflective of our diverse community.
Thank you, Joshua. We'll now move on to question 2. The student activity fee is allocated to student government, AU Club Council, and student media. How do you plan on strengthening the relationship between the 3 branches? You have 2 minutes.
I think that the student activity fee, I would like to reevaluate how the student activity fee is allocated between those branches of student government. Are we perhaps giving AUSG, because of the fact that AUSG is in charge of essentially its own amount of funding and money, are we unfairly giving AUSG too much money? I think that I would like to look at the great work that student media has done and perhaps allow them to execute exactly what they would like to execute with more funding. I think as a student programmer myself, one of the biggest issues that you run into is simply funding. What could I do with $100 more, with $1,000 more, with $10,000 more? Students have such big ideas to improve this campus, and often the impediment is simply funding. So I would like to reevaluate and hear some more student input from several student groups on how that student activities fee should be more fairly perhaps allocated, because I don't think that it's necessarily the most fair way to do it, to have student government determine essentially its own budget.
Thank you. Joshua, please provide your response.
Yes, there's no secret that student government is taking too much money and taking it all. For many years, it's been monopolizing the conversation around the allocation fee. We have to stop, and it stops with this administration, this next administration. So we have to make sure that we're having AU Club Council, student media, in those conversations about what the budget looks like, and actually saying what are the needs of our media organizations, what are the needs of our clubs, and so making sure that we are saying, really assessing the growing need for programming and the growing need for student media. And I'm really proud of the work that these organizations do, and so I think we have to make sure that we are saying, if we prioritize student media, if we prioritize clubs and multiculturalism, we have to make sure that the budget is reflective of that, and making sure that student government is no longer monopolizing the conversations around student funds.
Thank you, Joshua. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, you may begin your time now.
And I think one of the greatest things about student media is that student media is what holds AUSG accountable oftentimes. Oftentimes, students don't know what's going on within AUSG until they read an Eagle article about it, until they read some type of coverage of XYZ that's happened in AUSG. And I would like to improve that relationship. First of all, AUSG shouldn't be doing things that make that relationship full of tension. There shouldn't have to be any there shouldn't have to be any reporting that angers anyone, because I think that AUSG should be okay with being held accountable and be open to criticism. I think that part of being the president of American University Student Government is being able to take other people's criticism and take that into progressive action.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yes, and so I have to make sure that we are keeping a working relationship, right? And so not just working with student media when things are going bad, or working with AUCC when things are going bad, but having that good relationship where you're checking in with them constantly and leaving the door open for dialogue and discussion. And so I made it sure my effort when I talked to the members of student media in AUCC that I want to adequately and adequately have conversations around things and wants and needs. And so I think it's important to just remember to readdress that the importance of relationship building and having relationships that are authentic and true, but also relationships that are early on and not just in measures when things are bad or when you have to do bad reporting or bad coverage.
Thank you for your responses. We'll now move on to question 3. Previous presidents have created programs and measures that have fallen out of use or fallen through, such as HOME or the Student Leadership Fund. How do you plan to make a lasting impact on AU? You have 2 minutes.
How do you make a lasting impact? You make a lasting impact by reaching what students want and being engaged with what students want. And so I think it's so important that you are constantly saying, hey students, I actually am your student government president and I want to work with you. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to see? I think you cannot go there with a personal agenda nor with a personal opinions and what you think is best. I think you have to include students in the conversation always. And so to make a lasting impact and to not see things fall through such as HOME or things such as the Student Leadership Fund, you have to make sure that you're doing work in the best of students' interests and having student interests at the forefront of your mind and your actions and working with students. I want to stress and emphasize that with part, because that with part is something that makes the difference always. It makes the difference in how your lasting legacy and your and the things you work on become achieved. And so when you work with students, not just in your best interest or the interest of others, you actually see results happen and things actually stay permanent.
Thank you, Joshua. Angela, you can provide your response.
I think one of the most important parts about making a long-lasting impact is having the stamina to continue to say no to the administration when they try to deprioritize your goals. I think part of what went wrong with HOME and why it's not necessarily used by students of color on this campus as much as we would like it to be is because of the execution. The idea was amazing, an amazing idea that so many students on campus support, but it took so long because administration doesn't prioritize having spaces for students of color on this campus, and it took so long that unfortunately the person who started the idea was unable to finish it. And because of that, it's so important to continue to push the envelope on emphasizing to the university, this is important, this is important, this is important. And there will be so many closed doors, and I think that having heard from previous student leaders, one of the most often occurrences as your time as AUSG president is closed doors and no's, and saying there's no funding for this, or there's just no possibility for this. I think what's most important is having the stamina to keep pushing and to say that this is important to students. That is why I was elected, and I will continue to fight for students until the day that I get what the students have been speaking up about. So I think what's really most important is just having this stamina and this emotional stamina to keep on going through when the times are hard.
Thank you. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Joshua, your time begins now.
Yes, I said yesterday at the Black Caucus debate, but you have to be unbought and unbossed. And I think when you have that mentality that no matter what, that you're working for students and with students, I think that will change the game. And so have that mentality that you're unbought and unbossed really motivates you to actually achieve what you have to achieve and what students want you to achieve. So making sure that you keep that mentality, make sure that you keep students' interest even when the going gets tough, even when the going gets rough, that you're actively working for students, actually and actively.
Thanks, Joshua. Angela?
I think to make a long-lasting impact, we have to be not only self-critical, critical of ourselves and student government, but also critical of the university and the institutions that are in place. There are important questions to ask. For example, how can AU be carbon neutral if we invest $19 million in fossil fuels? For example, why is Sylvia Burwell's salary so high compared to other university presidents across the country? There are important questions to ask yourself, and while it's so important to consider where administrators are coming from, it's also important to be critical of the institutions that are in place that result in the student voice often being drowned out.
Thanks, Angela. We'll now move on to our final question. Both of you have talked about advocating for the students in different areas. How do you plan on turning your advocacy into real action items with real results? You have 2 minutes. Angela?
I think that when you enter the office of AUSG, a lot of candidates run on a lot of ideas, and that's great, and I'm so glad that we get to push each other with our ideas. But we have to think exactly this minute you step into office, how am I going to make this happen? Specifically, who am I going to talk to? Where do I need to get the funding? And where does that funding have to come from? Unfortunately, there is this idea of there is a limited amount of funding in the world. So we must look at where we can take funding from to fund projects that are important to us. So after securing the funding, after figuring out who you need to talk to, you have to push. Continue to emphasize, continue to follow up. Never let an email go unresponded to from both ends. First of all, you should never be not responding to an email, but they should never not be responding to you. If they don't respond, go to their office, knock on their door. It's important to emphasize to administrators what issues are important to students on this campus. You have to continue to push, but you also have to understand what argument is going to be most appealing to those that are in charge of our student experience. Frankly, I think one of those things is just money. Are students going to continue to want to attend here, and how is this going to look in the media for incoming students? So let's push student issues, for example, tuition and affordability and dining. Let's push those issues in a way that is appealing to administrators. And also, I think that while these are bigger issues, there are smaller issues underneath these umbrellas. For example, just inviting one private vendor back onto campus, whether that be megabytes or not. I think that there are tangible things that you can do by allowing those connections and allowing those emphasizations of what you think student voices are advocating for to result in and accumulate into.
Thank you. Joshua, please provide your response.
Yeah, the work starts now, and it starts quick. I think oftentimes student government presidents and leaders, we think that, oh, it starts, the next academic school year. However, when you're elected as student government president, you're elected before the next academic school year. So you can start that work early on, and you can start that work readily and fast approaching. And so having that mindset of actually being active and engaged in the work before the academic school year is what really sets you apart. And so making sure that, you're actively taking those steps to make sure that things are happening before the next Eagles come, and utilizing your time really wisely and productively. And so I want to make sure that if elected, that I'm making sure that we are using our time in our best interest, and making sure that I'm not just starting in August, but I'm starting now in March and April, and making sure that we are actually committed to what we say we're doing and following through. And I think that goes back to coming on one accord with a mission and a vision, not just as a president, but as the executive branch, and also as a student government organization in general.
Thanks, Josh. We will now give you each 45 seconds for your rebuttals. Angela, you may begin.
I think that in order to really advocate for students on campus, I agree with Josh in the sense that our work begins now and our work never, ever, ever ends. I think that as a USG president, you are on call 24/7. And I've had experience with that, and I think that part of being able to give your whole self into the position is admitting that this is going to be your life and this is what we're going to dedicate ourselves to. So I think that my rebuttal is just that I would fully commit to this position, and I think that there is nothing more important than being able to fully throw yourself into a position and think about it 24/7.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yes, and I think not only just throwing yourself in, but also reassessing and adjusting. I think oftentimes we get stagnant into our roles and stagnant into our ways, but making sure that if something's going wrong, or if students want a different direction, that you're being able to be flexible and adjustable. And so making sure that you are not too rigid or not too fixed in the ways in your thinking, but making sure that you are able to be again flexible and able to really change or alter based off of what students need, and keeping student needs at the forefront.
Angela and Joshua, thank you both for joining us tonight. That concludes the 2019 Student Government Debate. Voting is now open. You can access the link on your MyAU profile or in your student email account.
Tune in to the Town Hall Q&A being held right after this debate in the Tavern on our Facebook and YouTube pages. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at AUTV. Thank you. I'm Awais Ahmad.
And I'm Alexis Arnold. Thank you and good night.